There are big companies and institutions hit by SQL injection all the time, since from the past decades and until now. If you're hit, all your usernames and passwords stored in your company database may get leaked. Not only your data can be compromised by SQL injection, it could also cause even more severe problems, like destroying the tables, databases, installing reverse shell in your systems, and so on. And you might hear such news time to time in Facebook, newspapers, televisions, and so on. This is bad for the business of all the parties that are involved. Therefore, in this mini lecture series, I'm going to talk about what SQL injection is, different types of SQL injection attack patterns, and most importantly, how do we defend against SQL injection attack? First of all, what is SQL? Most websites use the database to store data, such as usernames, passwords, and so on. And then there is web applications, which needs to read, update, and insert data into such database. So the web application needs to interact with the database, and this is typically done by means of SQL, a structured query language. So SQL is a standard language for accessing relational databases. Although there are different kinds of relational databases like MySQL, Oracle, MS Server, and so on, the syntax of SQL is generally independent of the vendor. They are more or less the same. For example, to fetch a set of records, you can use this query syntax, SQL query syntax, like select the set of tables that you want to query from a specific table user where the ID is equal to 12. And this is an SQL query for fetching a set of records. And to add data to the table, you can use insert into the name of the table, the set of columns, and the values. To modify the data, you can use update query, and so on. And this is called SQL. Before we discuss about SQL injection attack, let us recap about how the client, the web server, and the backend database interacts. From the browser, a user may enter some information like username and password. Such information will be passed to the web server in terms of the parameters attached in the HTTP request. So let us just say these are HTTP request parameters, which are the information entered by the user. The request will be processed by the web application running in the web server. In our example, the web application are PHP programs. So PHP programs will construct SQL queries based on the information sent by the user to fetch or update necessary data to the backend database in terms of SQLs. So the backend database will run the SQL sent by the PHP programs web application, and then it will return the result. The PHP programs will process the results returned from the backend database, and the result may be used in constructing the HTTP response to be sent back to the client. Recall that HTTP response is typically HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And in this HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, the result returned from the backend database may be there. Once the browser receives such a response, it will execute the code, and then you will see a beautiful web page. So you may be able to guess by now that what SQL injection is all about. In SQL injection, an attacker is trying to gain access to the database by manipulating user inputs, which are used in SQL queries. Because you know that the web application will accept user input entered by the user, and then use them to construct SQL queries, which are then sent to the backend database, which executes such queries. So the idea is that to conduct an SQL injection, inject special characters such as quote, hash, and some SQL keywords like or, and so on, so as to cause a malformed SQL queries. We will elaborate more about that later. And in places where user input are accepted, like login forms where you can enter username and password, URL, and in URL also there is a query component where you can modify the query parameters like user, password, and so on. So SQL injection can be used to obtain sensitive information like admin user password, and also can be used to delete database tables, upload files, create reverse shell, and so on. So there are many things that can be done by SQL injection. So to recap, in a basic SQL injection, the user will send a malicious input through the HTTP request parameters so that the programs in web server will use such inputs to construct an SQL query, which will result in malformed query or unintended queries that are sent to the database. The database, if the query is still valid, as long as the query is valid, it will execute and it will return the result because the database does not know which inputs are malicious. As long as the SQL query is valid, it will return the query result, send it back to the web applications. The web application may use the result to construct the HTTP response that are sent back to the client. And then what will happen is that the client may see a sensitive information, and that is a basic SQL injection attack. So in the next video, I will demonstrate about such a basic SQL injection attack. Stay tuned.